I sat in the back of my small, crowded food stall, listening to the sirens wailing from across the city, the sound of my cousin's restaurant empire collapsing. A week ago, my extended family had treated me like a ghost. When I spent 3 years developing a revolutionary, umami-rich fermentation sauce for my small shop, my cousin, Trung, the family's golden boy, had broken into my storage, photocopied my notebooks, and convinced the family to pool their savings to open a 5-branch chain using my work. They told me, "You're too slow to scale, Trung has the vision." They stole my life's work, fired me, and publicly shamed me at the family reunion. They thought I was a pathetic, small-time cook who couldn't protect his own intellectual property. They didn't know that my sauce was a living ecosystem. The base fermentation process required a precise, hyperstable sub-zero cold chain during the finishing phase to prevent the wild microbes from turning toxic. It was a secret I hadn't written in the notebooks, a process I controlled through a proprietary, automated stabilization unit I built myself. Trung had stolen the ingredients, but he had no idea why the sauce needed to be treated like high-tech medicine. I watched the news report, mass food poisoning at all 5 golden sauce locations. Authorities cite explosive bacterial growth. Trung was now facing millions in lawsuits and a criminal investigation for health violation. I walked out to my stove, turned the heat on, and poured a small jar of my perfected, stabilized sauce into the pot. The line of customers outside my humble stall was already around the block. 3 years earlier, I believed family was the one thing that couldn't be taken from me. I was wrong. The kitchen behind Auntie Hoa's house smelled like scorched garlic and steam that never quite cleared. And that was where I spent most of my 20s, hunched over a row of ceramic crocks lined up like patients in a ward. Each one held a different stage of the same sauce, the one I'd been chasing since I was 22. Since the night my grandmother handed me her handwritten fermentation notes on a piece of paper, so brittle it nearly disintegrated in my hand. She never got the balance right. I knew that even as a teenager, tasting her attempts and feeling the sharp bite where there should have been depth. But something about the base, the way she'd combined soybeans with a wild-caught koji culture from the mountains near Dalat, stayed with me long after she passed. It became the question I couldn't stop asking. What if I fixed it? What if I found the missing piece? It took 3 years to find it, and the missing piece nearly killed the whole batch twice. The sauce wasn't just fermented. It was alive in a way most people never had to think about. A colony of microorganisms that behaved beautifully under the right conditions and turned lethal under the wrong ones. I discovered that on a Tuesday in my second year when an early batch spiked in temperature during an unexpected heat wave, and I watched, sick to my stomach, as the surface bloomed with a film that hadn't been there the day before. I dumped 4 months of work down the drain that night and didn't sleep. After that, I stopped trusting ambient temperature control. I built something instead, a small stabilization unit cobbled together from a second-hand compressor, an industrial-grade thermostat I'd rewired myself, and a set of sensors that tracked not just temperature but humidity and microbial density in real time. It wasn't elegant. It looked like a science fair project that had wandered into a restaurant kitchen. But it worked, and it was the only reason my sauce didn't kill anyone. I never wrote that part down, not because I was hiding it from my family. In the beginning, I didn't think there was anything to hide. I thought we were all on the same side. My cousin Trung didn't see the sauce that way. He saw a black market opportunity dressed up as loyalty. Trung had always been the one the family pointed to when they wanted to talk about success. He'd gone to business school in Ho Chi Minh City, come back with a vocabulary full of words like scalability and brand equity, and married into a family with enough capital to make his ideas sound less like gambling and more like destiny. He was charming in the specific way that made older relatives forget to ask hard questions. When he laughed, the whole room laughed with him, and when he was serious, people leaned in like he was about to say something important. He'd tasted my sauce for the first time at a family dinner 18 months ago. I remember the exact look on his face, a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. "This is insane, Ethan," he'd said, setting his chopsticks down like the meal itself had become secondary. "Do you know what you have here?" I shrugged it off. "It's a sauce, Trung. It's a business," he said, and something in his voice made the back of my neck go cold, though I didn't understand why until much later. For months after that, he circled. He'd stop by my stall, the tiny 6-stable shop I'd scraped together with savings and a loan I was still paying off, and asked questions that sounded like curiosity but felt in retrospect like reconnaissance. How long did the fermentation take? What was in the base? Did I keep notes? I answered most of it because he was family, because the idea that he might be cataloging my life's work for later use hadn't yet occurred to me as something a person could do to someone who shared his blood. The break-in happened on a Sunday, when I'd gone to visit my mother 2 provinces over. I didn't know it had happened until I unlocked the storage room behind my stall on Tuesday morning and noticed the lock was a half-turn looser than I'd left it. Nothing was missing. That was the strange part, nothing physical. My notebooks were exactly where I'd left them, stacked on the metal shelf beside the Crocs. It wasn't until I opened the family group chat 3 days later, the one I rarely checked because it was mostly recipes and photos of my aunt's grandchildren, that I understood what had actually been taken. There was a message from Trung, posted at 11 at night, glowing with exclamation points. Family, I have incredible news. I've found the recipe that's going to change everything for us. Ethan's sauce, it's ready. I've had it tested by a food scientist and we can scale it. 5 locations, a real restaurant group. This is our chance to finally build something that lasts. Attached were photographs. Photographs of my notebook pages, photographed at an angle that suggested someone had laid them flat on my own storage shelf, and used a phone to capture every line of ratios and timing charts I'd spent 3 years refining. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I called Auntie Hoa instead, my voice shaking in a way I hated, and she told me, in the gentle but final tone she used when she'd already made up her mind, that Trung had explained everything, that this was a wonderful opportunity for the family, that surely I understood how important it was for someone to finally take the sauce seriously. Take it seriously, I repeated. I've been taking it seriously for 3 years. You've been taking it seriously in a 6-stable noodle shop, Khan, she said. Trung wants to put it in 5 restaurants. Do you understand the difference? I didn't have an answer for that, not one that would land the way I needed it to. I hung up and sat on the floor of my storage room for a long time, staring at the shelf where my notebook still sat, technically untouched, completely violated. The family reunion happened 2 weeks later at Uncle Fong's house, the kind of gathering with folding tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed people who weren't even invited. I went because not going would have been its own kind of confession, and because some small, stubborn part of me still believed that if I stood in front of everyone and explained what had actually happened, they would understand. Trung was already holding court by the drinks table when I arrived, sketching the restaurant concept on a napkin for a cluster of uncles who nodded like he was describing a moon landing. 5 locations. A modern fast casual concept built around Grandma's golden sauce, my grandmother's name on my sauce, in a business plan I'd never seen until that moment. Ethan, he said, spotting me, his smile wide and easy. Perfect timing. Come, tell everyone how excited you are. The yard went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone already knows what's about to happen and is waiting to see how it plays out. I'm not excited, I said. You stole my notebooks. Someone laughed. Not cruelly, not exactly. More the nervous laugh of people hoping a joke would diffuse something they didn't want to deal with. Trung's smile didn't move. Stole, he said, tasting the word like it offended him. I photographed some notes that were sitting on a shelf in a room I have a key to because our family shares that storage space. I didn't take anything from you. I'm trying to build something for all of us. You broke in while I was gone. I let myself into a family storage room, he corrected, and I watched 3 separate relatives nod along with him, and something in my chest went very still and very cold. Uncle Fong stepped in then the way patriarchs do, hands raised like he was calming 2 dogs. Enough, Ethan, we understand you're upset. But think about this practically. You have one small shop. You're exhausted, you work 16-hour days, and for what? Trung has a real plan, investors, a team. This could take care of the whole family. It's my recipe, I said, and I heard how small my voice sounded even as I said it. It's grandmother's recipe, Auntie Hoa said gently, like she was correcting a child. You just finished it. Trung is the one who can actually do something with it. I looked around the yard, at faces I'd known my entire life, people who had eaten at my table, who had asked me for the recipe as a compliment, and were now using that same recipe as a verdict against me. And I understood with a clarity that felt like falling that I had already lost this argument before I opened my mouth. It had been decided somewhere in a group chat I barely used, in conversations I hadn't been part of, by people who had already priced my 3 years of work into a 5-branch expansion plan and found the number more convincing than my face. "You're just jealous," Trung said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "You built something beautiful and now you're scared someone else can do more with it than you can. I get it, but this isn't about you anymore, Ethan. This is about the family." Nobody defended me. That was the part that stayed lodged somewhere under my ribs long after the yard emptied out and the folding tables were stacked away. Not one voice in a family of 40 people said "wait, this doesn't sound right." I left before dessert. Trung called after me something about not being so dramatic, about how there'd be a place for me if I wanted it. Consulting, he called it, like I'd be doing him a favor by advising him on the thing he'd taken from me. I didn't answer. I got in my car and drove back to the shop and sat in the dark dining room, chairs stacked on tables, the smell of the day's cooking still hanging in the air, and I thought about my grandmother's brittle piece of paper, and the 4 months of ruined sauce I'd poured down the drain, and the small, ugly bloom of bacteria that had taught me exactly how dangerous this recipe could be in the wrong hands. They didn't know what they had. They thought they had a recipe. I sat there for a long time, and somewhere in that stillness underneath the hurt, something else began to take shape, quiet and patient and very, very cold. The idea didn't arrive all at once. It grew the way the sauce itself grew, slowly, in the dark, needing exactly the right conditions to become something dangerous. I noticed Trung's black SUV parked across the street from my shop 3 times in the space of 2 weeks, always in the hour after close, always with him pretending to check his phone while his eyes drifted toward my windows. He never came in during those visits. He was watching, the way a man watches a door he intends to walk through eventually, working up the nerve or waiting for an opening. I gave him one. It wasn't hard to make it look natural. I kept a battered notebook, not my real one, not the one with 3 years of temperature logs and microbial notes, and the hard-won ratios that had taken me 2 ruined batches to discover, but a second notebook, the kind I might have used for a first draft, the kind any working cook keeps around for jotting things down before they're sure. I filled it over the course of a week, writing slower than I needed to, letting my handwriting sprawl the way it did when I was thinking out loud on paper instead of documenting something final. I wrote the soybean ratio correctly. I wrote the koji culture sourcing correctly, the specific strain, the specific supplier in the highlands near De Lat, details that would make Trung's food scientist nod with satisfaction. Because they were true, because they mattered, because they were the kind of thing that made a recipe feel complete to someone who'd never had to keep a living culture alive through a heat wave. What I left out was smaller than a sentence. I left out the temperature curve. I didn't hide it dramatically. I didn't tear out a page or leave a suspicious gap. I simply wrote the recipe the way most sauces get written: ferment at ambient temperature, monitor for 3 to 5 days, adjust to taste. True for 900 sauces out of 1,000. A death sentence for this one if nobody understood why it wasn't. I left the notebook on the metal shelf in the storage room, in the exact spot where the real one had sat the day Trung let himself in with a key he had no business having. I left the lock a half-turn looser than I usually kept it, the same careless tell that had given him away the first time. Then I went home and didn't check on it for 4 days, because a man watching a door doesn't walk through it if he thinks someone's standing on the other side waiting for him. On the 5th day, the group chat lit up again. "Huge update," Trung wrote, at 9 in the morning this time, confident enough now to stop hiding behind late-night adrenaline. "Our food scientist confirmed it. We have the complete formulation. Construction starts on location 1 next week." I read that message standing at my own stove, stirring a pot of the real sauce, the one breathing quietly in a stabilization unit that hummed like a refrigerator with something closer to a heartbeat. And I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't quite peace but was adjacent to it. He believed he had everything. That belief was the whole trap. I heard about the consultants through Auntie Hoa, who still called me sometimes, guilt making her voice softer than it used to be, updating me on family news like the last 2 weeks hadn't happened. "Trung hired someone from a big food company," she said. A real scientist, very expensive. He says the sauce tastes almost exactly like yours already. Isn't that wonderful? Almost, I said. I could picture the man easily enough, even without meeting him. The kind of consultant who got hired for his credentials and his confidence rather than his humility. The kind who'd taste a sample, run it through a gas chromatograph, and declare a project solved because the flavor compounds matched close enough on paper. Flavor was the visible part of the equation. Flavor was what Trung's tongue could verify, what focus groups could rate on a scale of 1 to 10, what the food scientist could point to as proof of success. Nobody in that operation had spent a Tuesday afternoon watching a film bloom across the surface of 4 ruined months. I drove past the first construction site once 3 weeks in, unable to help myself. A gleaming storefront taking shape in a strip mall on the good side of town. Banners already hung announcing golden sauce, grand opening soon. My grandmother's nickname stretched across vinyl in gold lettering. Underneath a stock photo of a bowl that looked nothing like anything I'd ever made. I sat in my car across the street for 11 minutes and then drove home. The warehouse came up in a different conversation, weeks later, one I wasn't supposed to hear at all. I'd gone to drop off a birthday gift for my youngest cousin and found half the family gathered in Uncle Fong's living room, Trung standing at the head of the coffee table with a laptop open, walking everyone through a supply chain diagram like a man presenting to a board. "We found a facility in the industrial district," he was saying. "Cheap lease, good size, we can batch produce the sauce there and distribute to all 5 locations. It'll cut our per unit cost by almost 40%. Is it climate controlled?" Someone asked, Uncle Fong maybe, or one of the older cousins who'd put actual money in. "It's got AC, Trung said, waving a hand. "That's plenty. This isn't rocket science, it's fermentation. People have been making fermented sauce in open-air kitchens for 1,000 years. I stood in the doorway with a wrapped present in my hands and felt the specific, terrible clarity of watching someone drive toward a cliff they didn't know was there. Because he was right in a sense. People had made fermented sauces in open kitchens for 1,000 years. Those sauces hadn't been engineered around a mountain Koji strain that turned genuinely unstable past a certain temperature threshold. A strain I'd chosen specifically for its depth of flavor, and had spent a year learning to control precisely because it was more volatile than anything traditional. Grandmother's original recipe, weaker and less refined, would probably have survived that warehouse. Mine wouldn't. Mine needed the unit I'd built with my own hands, the one nobody in that room had ever asked to see, because nobody had ever asked how I actually made the thing they were so eager to steal. Trung caught sight of me in the doorway and his expression flickered, something between surprise and irritation, like I was an inconvenience that had wandered into a private conversation. "Ethan," he said, "didn't see you there." "I brought Kevin's gift," I said, holding it up like evidence of my innocence. "Right, thanks." He turned back to the laptop, then seemed to reconsider, and I watched him decide to perform generosity in front of the family. "Actually, since you're here, you could probably tell us if there's anything we're missing, storage-wise. Any tips from your years doing it small scale?" Every eye in the room turned to me. It was, I understood later, a kind of test, an offering of goodwill that cost him nothing because he'd already decided the answer wouldn't matter. "You need tighter climate control than AC," I said. "The fermentation is more sensitive than people think, especially at scale, especially in a humid warehouse. If the temperature spikes even a few degrees over a couple of days, the microbial balance can shift fast." I had a batch turn early in my second year from something as simple as a heat wave. Trung's smile didn't leave his face, but something behind his eyes went flat. The particular flatness of a man who has already made his decision and is now simply waiting for the room to stop questioning it. "We appreciate the input," he said, in a tone that made clear the input had already been filed under noted, ignored. "But we've had this validated by an actual food scientist, Ethan. With respect, you ran a 6-stable shop. We're building something at a completely different scale. Sometimes scale changes the rules." "Scale doesn't change biology," I said. A short laugh went around the room, not at me exactly, but not with me either. Uncle Fong patted the air between us, the diplomatic gesture I remembered from the reunion. Let the professionals handle the science, Con. Trung's team knows what they're doing. I looked at Trung one more time, and for one strange second I almost said something else. Almost warned him harder. Almost pushed past the performance into something real. Some last flicker of the family instinct that says you don't let someone walk off a cliff even if they shoved you first. But I thought about the yard at Uncle Fong's house, the 40 silent faces, the word jealous asterisk sitting in my chest like a stone I hadn't been able to swallow or spit out. I set the gift on the table and left. The 5 locations opened faster than I expected. 11 weeks from groundbreaking to grand opening. A pace Trung bragged about constantly, calling it the fastest scaling story in the regional food scene to anyone who'd listen, including, apparently, a local business journalist who wrote a glowing feature about the young visionary reviving his grandmother's legacy. I read that article standing behind my own counter, in my own 6-stable shop. The phrase asterisk reviving his grandmother's legacy sitting on my tongue like something spoiled. The warehouse ran 24 hours in the final week before launch, Auntie Hoa told me, proud in a way that made her voice climb half an octave, batching sauce around the clock to fill the pipeline for 5 simultaneous grand openings. Big steel drums, she said when I asked, out of some morbid need to know exactly how bad it would be. Big steel drums lined up under fluorescent lights in a building with decent air conditioning, and absolutely nothing else. No humidity control, no microbial monitoring, no cold chain, no stabilization. Nothing standing between 3 years of my careful engineering, and a room full of soybeans and wild culture left to do whatever wild culture does when nobody's watching closely enough to notice it's already changing. I thought about the timeline. Ambient fermentation, even mismanaged, usually held for 2, maybe 3 days before anything visibly wrong began to show. Long enough for a launch. Long enough for reviews. Long enough for Trung to stand in front of 5 grand openings with a ribbon-cutting scissors and a microphone and tell everyone this was only the beginning. The night before the launch, I drove past the warehouse one last time. Through a gap in the loading dock door, I could see the drums under the lights, rows of them, patient and quiet and already, though nobody inside that building knew it yet, beginning to change. Somewhere across town, Trung was almost certainly rehearsing his opening remarks in a mirror, rehearsing the smile that had gotten him a family's life savings and a stranger's stolen work, rehearsing gratitude for a legacy he'd never once asked how to protect. I went home and slept better than I had in weeks. The grand opening of the flagship location looked exactly like Trung had promised it would, which was, in its own way, the last good day of his life. Balloons in gold and red arced over the entrance. A ribbon stretched across the doorway, the kind that requires oversized scissors, and a photographer crouched at an unflattering angle. Trung stood in the center of it all in a suit that fit too well to be anything but rented for the occasion, flanked by 2 of the uncles who'd put in the most money, both of them beaming like men who'd already spent their returns in their heads. A local news van idled at the curb. A line had formed down the block before the doors even opened, drawn by 3 weeks of social media teasers and the newspaper feature that had called him a visionary. I wasn't there. I heard about it the way I heard about everything now, secondhand, through Auntie Hoa's calls or the group chat I still hadn't muted, though I'd stopped responding to it weeks ago. The first 3 days were, by every metric that mattered to Trung, a triumph. Sold out by 2 p.m., he posted, with a photo of an empty steam table and a line of customers still snaking out the door. This is just the beginning. Comments piled up underneath. Family members I'd known my whole life typing hearts and fire emojis, congratulating him on vision, on courage, on finally giving grandmother's recipe the stage it deserved. Someone tagged me in one of the threads asking if I was proud of my cousin. I didn't answer. The second location opened the next morning. The third and fourth the day after, back to back. Ribbon cuttings choreographed like a parade. By the third day, 5 restaurants across the city were serving the same sauce, batched in the same warehouse, trucked out in identical steel containers that had sat under fluorescent lights for the better part of 2 weeks, doing exactly what unrefrigerated, unstabilized wild fermentation does when nobody is watching the clock. I knew, because I'd done the math 100 times without meaning to, that the clock was almost up. The first sign, according to what I pieced together later from local news reports and the aunties who couldn't stop talking, was a smell. Not immediately foul, fermentation rarely announces itself that way, but a shift, a sourness underneath the umami that a trained palate would have caught and a rushed kitchen staff, slammed by opening week volume, did not. The consultant who'd validated the recipe wasn't in the kitchens daily. He delivered his formulation and moved on to his next client, the way consultants do. His job finished the moment the flavor profile matched on paper. By the fourth day, customers at the downtown location started calling in sick. Not dramatically at first. A stomachache here, a bout of nausea there, the kind of thing easy to blame on something else. A bad shellfish dish eaten elsewhere, a stomach bug going around. But the pattern accumulated faster than anyone wanted to admit. 6 people from the same restaurant, then 11. Then a cluster from the second location, reporting the same symptoms within hours of each other, a coincidence too tight to explain away. I found out it had officially become a story when Auntie Hoa called me at 11 at night, her voice stripped of the polite optimism she'd been performing for weeks. "Something's wrong," she said. "People are saying they got sick. Trung says it's nothing, some bad luck with one supplier, but Ethan, I don't understand what's happening." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, looking at the stabilization unit humming quietly against my kitchen wall, its small display reading a temperature so precise it barely fluctuated by 1/10 of a degree. "You should tell him to shut the warehouse down," I said, which was true, and which I said knowing, with a certainty that felt like ice water down my spine, that it was already far too late for that to matter. By the weekend, it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a headline. Mass food poisoning reported at all 5 golden sauce locations. Read the first one. And then the follow-ups came fast, the way bad news does once it has enough weight behind it to fall on its own. Local news vans parking outside the same storefronts that had hosted ribbon cuttings 4 days earlier. A health department spokesperson speaking into a bouquet of microphones. The phrase, explosive bacterial growth, repeated across 3 different broadcasts by 3 different reporters who all seemed to enjoy saying it. I watched one of the segments standing in my own kitchen, the small television propped on the counter where I usually kept a radio, and saw footage of investigators in white coveralls hauling steel drums out of the warehouse on hand trucks, sealing the loading dock with yellow tape, loading samples into coolers marked with biohazard stickers. I didn't feel triumphant. That surprised me. I'd expected something closer to vindication, sharp and satisfying, the emotional payoff owed to 3 years of theft and humiliation. What I felt instead was quieter and colder, something closer to watching weather happen. A storm I'd known was coming, arriving exactly on schedule, doing exactly the damage storms do, indifferent to whether I wanted it to stop. The final image I saw, before I turned the television off, was Trung standing outside the flagship location, no longer in his rented suit, wearing the kind of wrinkled shirt that suggested he hadn't slept, being shouted at by a reporter about lawsuits and health code violations, while 2 health inspectors carried out the last of the sealed drums behind him. For one moment, the camera caught him looking past the reporter, past the crowd gathered on the sidewalk, scanning the street like he was searching for someone. I was 3 blocks away by then, walking home along a different route than usual, and I will never know for certain whether he was looking for me. I like to think, in the version of that day I've told myself since, that some part of him understood exactly whose face he was hoping to find in that crowd, and exactly why that face wasn't there. I didn't stop walking. The lawsuits came before the criminal investigation did, which Trung's lawyer later told him was the better order, though I doubt it felt that way to him at the time. 43 people across the 5 locations reported symptoms severe enough to require medical attention. 3 were hospitalized for dehydration and acute bacterial infection. None of them died, which was the one mercy in the whole collapse, though the health department's report, 6 pages of technical language about improper storage temperatures and unmonitored fermentation, read like an autopsy of a business that had never really been alive to begin with. The fines came first, then the civil suits, 4 of them, filed within the same month by families whose children had spent nights in the hospital over food poisoning that traced back, unambiguously, to a warehouse with an air conditioner where a cold chain should have been. Then the criminal investigation, health code violations serious enough that Trung's name started appearing in articles with the word charges instead of visionary. The family's collective investment, the pooled savings of aunts and uncles who'd trusted Trung's napkin sketches over my 3 years of quiet, careful work, evaporated somewhere in the space of 6 weeks. I heard about the aftermath the way I'd heard about everything, through Auntie Hoa, though her calls came less often now. And when they did, her voice had lost the bright optimism it used to carry even through bad news. "Everyone's blaming everyone," she told me once in November, months after the warehouse had been sealed for good. "Uncle Fong says Trung lied about the food scientist's credentials. Trung says Uncle Fong pushed him to open faster than he wanted to. Nobody talks about it directly anymore. We just don't talk." I didn't ask her to elaborate. I'd learned, somewhere in the quiet months of that year, that there was a particular kind of peace in not needing to know every detail of a collapse I hadn't caused and hadn't tried to stop. I filed the patent application in October for the stabilization process and the specific fermentation method it protected. 3 years of engineering finally translated into language a legal system could recognize and defend. It felt strange, writing down on official paper the exact process I'd deliberately left out of a decoy notebook 7 months earlier. Strange and something close to relieving, like finally being allowed to say the sentence I'd been holding in my mouth since the night I found my storage lock a half-turn looser than I'd left it. My own restaurant opened in the spring, small at first. A single location 3 blocks from my old 6-stable shop, built slowly and correctly, with a proper cold chain and a stabilization system that had grown by then into something closer to professional equipment than a science fair project. I named it after my grandmother, not because I needed to reclaim the word from Trung, but because it had always been hers before it was anyone else's argument. Business writers eventually found their way to the story, drawn by the contrast. The cousin who'd nearly destroyed a family's savings chasing scale, and the quiet one who'd built something smaller and slower and never once made anyone sick. I gave 2 interviews and declined the rest. I didn't want to be the moral of somebody else's cautionary tale. I wanted to make sauce. Trung reached out once in early spring, a single text message after months of silence. "Can we talk? I could use the consulting work if you ever wanted to partner again." I read it twice, standing at my own counter, my own stabilization unit humming its quiet, precise hum against the wall behind me, and I felt, for the first time since the reunion in Uncle Fong's yard, something like closure rather than anger. I didn't answer. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to stay unopened long enough for the person on the other side to understand there was never going to be an answer. I still think about the yard sometimes. The folding tables, the 40 silent faces, the word jealous asterisk sitting in the air like something I was supposed to apologize for. I don't think about it with the same weight anymore. It's become something closer to a fact from another life, true but no longer load-bearing. These days, the line outside my restaurant starts forming before I've even unlocked the door. I stand at the stove most mornings, pouring a small jar of sauce into a waiting pot, watching the steam rise the way it always has, and I think sometimes about how quiet the whole revenge actually was. No confrontation, no triumphant reveal, just a notebook with one missing line and the patience to let greed do what greed always does when nobody's watching closely enough to stop it. The sirens across the city eventually stopped meaning anything to me at all. I just kept cooking,